And good happiness. But let us say good luck to all of you. Thank you.
Amazing. So if we don't have any further issues, inviting Prime Minister to open the debate. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. POIs, pronoun preferences, I don't really mind.
All right. Give me 30 seconds. I'll just switch my microphone.
Okay, sure.
Just to check I'm audible this way. Yeah, all right. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, I'm free to begin.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a global fight. Cliché, sure, but true nonetheless. The time for a singular faction is no more. This debate is about the conflation of beliefs. It is only in the face of karma that we can truly unite. And as the saying goes, karma is a mean girl, and sometimes what all of us need is just a mean girl to get us going. How do we construct this debate? 3 points. Firstly, we think that status quo is probably pretty aimless. The environmentalist movement has generated a sort of apathy in that a lot of times these protests and these riots are not aimed towards the public. They are aimed like a parent telling its children what to do. What our world defends is something that looks more so like social media campaigns, focusing on small steps like slogans or logos, thinking about this process of saving the earth as something that is atomic, as a building block, right? Because it is only through karma with each step that this compounds into benefits later on in the future. Like how this might manifest is like one plastic bottle thrown might mean that like 1,000 plastic bottles are thrown each year, probably the campaign method they use. Crucially, karma is not about reincarnation. Karma plays into other cultures as well, right? Things like afterlife, things like Christianity and Buddhism. Therefore, all of these people now have an active stake when we introduce karma into the game. Secondly, we would view karma or this concept of karma as a tool in the toolbox of the environmentalist movement. We don't necessarily have to defend it at the cost of all other competing strategies. We think that as long as karma further advances our campaigns with protests and riots, we can utilize it alongside this and every other campaign that we would also use. Thirdly, who are these people on the fence that we're trying to persuade? Firstly, we think that these people are mostly isolated. I think it's true in that humans in every sense is selfish. We only care about what we want because we can only feel what we feel. Therefore, I'm probably going to care more about my gaming than not throwing away this plastic bottle and instead recycling. We think that this form of karma actively stops this, and in fact, we're able to persuade conservative people who, in general, are not aligned with the environmentalist movement, given that it's mostly liberal. I'll take a point actually from whoever.
Yeah, why are these mechanisms exclusive to usage of karma? Social media posts and building blocks can be done irrespective of usage of karma in order for it to push these narratives.
The difference, okay, you know what? It's a great question because I'm so excited to say this. The difference between karma is that it relates to each individual action. A lot of times, a lot of these environmentalist movements do not directly point to each individual audience. Rather, they just say as a general faction that you should do this, you should do that. We think karma is a self-discovery journey, and that actually helps people more when they think about how their actions impact later on. We think this concept is really helpful, not just as a campaigning source, but as a way for the audience to learn, or the public. Okay, one argument, but extensive. How do we get more awareness and better quality awareness at that? The preface to this argument is that we attract like the environmentalist movement mainly attracts liberal people. This is just how it is, given that people are more like free-minded. Therefore, we think that the large majorities are not actually religious. We would like to attract different kinds of public in order to gain different sorts of lobbying power. We think that the prerequisite to like saving the earth is to uniting everyone. The notion of karma appeals to all. 4 reasons. Firstly, because karma encourages the reconsideration of non-eco-friendly actions. The crucial line here is that it is seen as a pushback because now you start to have to consider your consequences. And crucially, a lot of times karma is seen as disproportionate to the action that you initially done. Similar to the ripple effect where you do one small action and now the consequences you have to deal with are way worse. Like you not doing your homework suddenly leading into you missing a scholarship award is probably going to be the same line of logic that we follow here. This is the fundamental reason why, for example, people are going to realize the importance of planting trees more, probably going to buy into the environmentalist movement more. At the very least, if they don't do any of that, at least they're going to start to reconsider any thoughtless action that they would have done, like, for example, not donating to this movement. The comparative that you defend on opposition is a too soft stance because status quo and their strategies are not linked to them. You are not putting the debate enough about onto the public because the public only cares about what they want. And given that you don't prove that link sufficient with current strategies, we tell you karma is the best way when they have to start focusing on the consequences that lead into their lives. Secondly, because this notion of karma emphasizes the importance of each individual action. And this is crucial because a lot of times the mindset of people is, what's the point? If I'm only doing this once, if I'm only doing this twice, right? The difference here is that now you also have future generations to consider because impacts compound over time. And irregardless of that, even if it doesn't compound, you start to think that each action you do now, you start to focus, right? Instead of just blindsiding it because you know that in the future it's going to come back to you. Now I'm more likely to actually use a recycle bin. I'm more likely to actually think about all of the plants and trees that have been cut down, more likely to be more thoughtful. All of this suggests to us that this individual action is actually what is necessary because you're going over this initial barrier of entry that a lot of people feel a lot of people encounter and therefore don't actually do eco-friendly activities. Thirdly, because we bolster communal efforts. And the reason for this is that the logic behind karma is cause and effect. And the idea behind this, which is enforced in many other cultures and many other religions, is that you are now interconnected with other people around you because your cause means that this effect is going to be far-reaching and therefore it affects people around you. This interconnectedness means that you start to focus around the space around you because those are the people that you can best work together to have the best consequences in the future. Absent of karma, there is going to be a collective action problem because there is no sufficient force to unite against. Like, sure, opposition might say, oh, but you can unite over the common thought of saving the earth. Look how what has gotten us in status quo. Clearly, we need something greater that people can bond over. And given that a lot of times, a lot of religious groups have already done the legwork in painting what karma really is. So we can borrow their logic, we can borrow their rhetoric and strengthen it even more on our side. Fourthly, more religious groups are likely to buy in on government. And the reason behind this is because we are using their own logic. A lot of times, environmentalist movements are seen as distant and separate. You know what, I'll take a point. Sorry, even if it's about 6.
Out of order.
Okay, irregardless, more religious groups are likely to buy in, right? Because now it is seen as something that is more noble. And actually, given that they've done the legwork for us, we're probably going to be more closely tied with these certain groups because now we actually have the support of, for example, Christians or Buddhists who recognize the importance of karma and want to act and want to appear morally justified. And this is necessary because if religious groups want to maintain a moral high ground, they necessarily have to appeal to actions or to environmentalist movements that necessarily buttresses their logic. Because if they don't, then they'll be seen as principally inconsistent, and we don't think religious groups want that. This is important because now we're able to shift the overturn window given that a lot of religious people are conservative. But on the baseline, we get more people to actually enact change. And given that this metric is about change, we get more awareness, we get more change because not only do more people know, given that when this is taught in school, me and the bros will probably stop playing games and start planting trees. I think this is what we all want.
All right, I'd like to thank this speaker for that fine speech and now inviting the leader of opposition. Here.
Am I audible and visible?
Yeah. Hi. I think your voice is breaking down. Can you speak a sentence?
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are. But can you try speaking one longer sentence?
Am I audible? Because
Okay, I think this is being disturbed. Can you turn off your camera and try speaking once?
it sound better now?
Yeah.
Owen, just turn off your camera.
Okay.
Yeah. Or try to reconnect.
I'll be starting my speech. Wait. Prefer pronunciation POIs verbally. Okay, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The issue under opening government is that a lot of people don't subscribe into these principles in the first place because people are from different religion. But secondly is on how secondly is on how these a lot of the OG's benefit is also coexistent with our side because people do care for themselves and people are individualistic, right? All of these reasons so proud to oppose, right? This is how we're structuring my POL speech, right? I'm going to a few layers of rebuttals. I'm going to 2 layers of characterization. Number 1 on what environmental movements want and how it looks like, right? And number 2 on why karma makes the campaign less effective as opposed to it. And number 3, what is the alternative under our side of the house, right? First rebuttal then is on how opening government claims that karma gains more attention, right? No, the only attention that you get are within religion people, right? Let me flip this argument over by saying how people from different religions are likely to not subscribe into this movement because it's different religion and different principles from their principles, right? But when you integrate religion principle into the movement, you're probably likely to increase more religious principles into the movement because you're going to appeal further to people who are from specific religions and to get more buy-in from these people, right? I think it's something that's really hard on the other side of the house to merge so many principles from different religions and expect people to buy it because people do have different principles, right? But secondly, somehow, no, I think because the people who subscribe into karma are probably people who already care about environment anyway, right? They're probably already people who already buy into the current idea of current life consequences because people are going to be individualistic at the end of the day, right? Because if people do care about environmental or environment issues on both sides of the house, I think they care for it on both sides of the house, right? I think average individuals won't prefer feel like what will happen after life or what happened in the next 100 years when they are literally getting the instant benefit right now, right? First characterization on what environmental movements want and why karma makes the whole entire campaign less effective, I suppose so, right? I think the environmental movement wants to get change into behavior, right? They probably want to get change within individuals, they want to get change within cooperation, they want to get change within states, right? I think when you appeal a Buddhist principle into a Christian who already goes against the principles of Buddhists in the first place to tell them to change their behavior, I think it's something that's really hard because they already buy into the principles that Christianity gives or Islamic gives to them in the first place, right? Second thing on our counterfactual, right? I think our counterfactual is easy, is that we want to preach about the current life consequences as opposed to future life consequences or afterlife consequences, right? I think it's to work out because of 2 things, right? A, somehow there is an urgency of it because the impact is going to be immediate. Secondly, somehow people do care for themselves because people are individualistic, right? They care for what happens to them now exactly at this point. They care if they live to the next day instead of they care if they live the next 100 years because they probably won't be able to live by then, right? So, first argument on how campaign becomes less effective under their side of the house, right? Because you do have to know that karma alienates a huge group of people within the world population, right? I have 2 layers under this. First layer is on how karma itself is not a mainstream belief, or is it a belief that not a lot of people subscribe into it in the first place, right? Sure, Buddhists and Hindus believe into it, but you do have to understand that atheists and Muslims don't subscribe into this belief. Christians don't care to the fullest extent, or not even in Bible in the first place, right? That is literally the half population, right? I think that this is a really serious problem under their side of the house because number 1, you cannot cater to the most amount of people. You cannot move to them, and the rhetoric doesn't work on them. Secondly, is how the people who subscribe it already the people who subscribe it already practice it in the first place, right? I think people who will not subscribe it will won't subscribe it anyway. Therefore, it isn't going to work. This means that the largest contributors of current issues right now won't subscribe into it anyway, right? This probably means that if I do care about karma and if my religion tells me about karma, I'm probably going to care and practice care about environmental issues because I know that if I don't care, karma will happen to me anyway, right? Then secondly, somehow a lot of people within status quo are individualistic, right? Because they care about like the immediate impacts, right? But even if you don't even if people do subscribe to karma, I think the consequence of bad karma is something that's speculative and something that's remote, right? Because the consequence of karma is the consequence that happens in the future, right? Individuals think that the environmental, I think that individuals under government side of the house will not think that environmental issue is environmental destruction is an issue that is caused because of karma from the past, right? Therefore, it is out of their reach to solve or even care about environmental issue because it's not their problem and it's something that's out of their reach, right? I think number one, you inherently decrease the legitimacy of environmental movement in the first place. But I think secondly, it de-incentivizes people to not care for karma and to care for environmental issues, right? Second thing that you have to note then is that even if they think the consequences are such that won't affect them in the afterlife, it means that there is like less urgency to actually care or to change their own behaviors in the first place because they already don't feel the urgency because it's something that doesn't happen immediately, right? I think thirdly then is on how environmental issues need real life evidence-based solution and scientific solutions and scientific things to back it up, right? Integrating the religion principles defeats it because it also further integrate more religion principles. I think it further pushes away these evidence-based solutions, right? I think what this means is that you're also going to push up the people who subscribe into environmental movements that because of these evidence-based solution and scientific solution, right? But fourthly, then somehow I think you inherently defeat the urgency because people now don't think that this isn't something that they should care for now. They could probably find a solution in 100 years where technology is better because that is then where the impact actually exists, right? What is the impact that you get under the other side of the house, right? Two things here very simple. A is how you decrease the urgency within the other side of the house. I guess that's been explained enough, right? Second thing is how this doesn't become an effective metric to begin with, right? I think best case is that people do care. People just don't care because people are from different religion, right? Then worst case that when people with a different religion unsubscribe to it because the principle is not the same, right? I think the scale in which you harm towards the environmental campaign is going to be huge because a larger scale of people probably don't like the environmental movement because they see it as something that's illegitimate and something that goes against their principle, right? Why don't our counterfactuals solve this gap? Is two things here. A is on how this is something that a lot of people subscribe within status quo, or something that a lot of people do care, right? I think a lot of people will care about what happens to them currently. I think average individuals will probably weigh what's currently happening now instead of what is going to happen in their afterlife, right? Secondly, is how the problem is going to be more immediate. I think people care now because because it is urgent, but I think because the urgency that creates the pressure for people to actually care on our side of the house, right? All of these reasons were so proud to oppose.
All right, I'd like to thank this speaker for the final speech and now inviting the Deputy Prime Minister to extend OG. Here.
All right, I'll take PY's scribbling. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I think we need to make very clear what exactly this motion really means, because I don't think opening opposition's concept of preaching karma has anything to do with the more charitable take in this round. I want to make something very clear off the top of this speech. Saying that not everyone believes in karma is not an auto win for you to be able to claim on the op. Saying that not everyone believes in karma does not immediately disregard the Gov case. I think Kayson made it very clear to you that obviously if you don't believe in karma, it won't affect you. And if you do, you're already probably buying into its values. So the idea of us preaching, the pure idea of pure religious Buddhist karma is counterintuitive to the idea of having this entire debate as a whole. The nuance mechanism we gave to you is to link the concept of karma to religious views and to make an explicit link between climate change and religion. Where we say things like every action of your life is interlinked to the outcomes of your afterlife. It's similar to the concept of heaven or hell, your reincarnation, regardless of which type of afterlife you believe in, regardless of your religion that caters towards Christianity, Islam or Judaism, it means regardless of your religious views, the view that every single action of your life affects your future existences, your future afterlives, is something that everyone who is religious can also opt into. And so now we're citing things, for example, like the importance of taking care of your climate within these particular religions, citing things like why exactly this also affects your general karma, and saying that this is something that also affects you personally as a religious person, even if you don't care so much about science. So what is this? So this debate isn't actually about whether people believe in karma or not. What is this debate actually about? Kayson's characterization to you was extremely clear. The pragmatic urgency to solve climate change is already clear as day. Most individuals from the liberal sector who have detached themselves from religious rhetoric or traditional values and prioritize things like science probably already want to support us. So if OO want to talk about atheists, they're more likely going to support us already anyways. The ones who tend to oppose this rhetoric are often one of two people. A, skeptics of facts, the people who oftentimes don't buy into the concept of science or buy into the idea that conservative or liberal concepts are diametrically opposed. But what this also means is that while numbers and figures are not enough to persuade them, they oftentimes opt into things like traditional beliefs and values, which also makes them more likely going to be religious. Secondly, people who are inherently selfish or self-interested. The rhetoric of looking out for our future generations has been tried on plenty of these people before, but most people disassociate because they fail to see why they should care about the people in the future. So most people tend to result in inaction when we say, take care of your future generations, because they're more self-interested in themselves. It is annoying we have to work with them to get to an effective point, but the climate crisis is too large of a problem for us to just ignore these types of people. The ability for us to work together and to bridge those current gaps between these communities is of utmost importance to the environmental movement. This is a debate of problem framing. The unique nuance we gave to you in the OG is that there are an insurmountable amount of barriers that you face with only liberal rhetoric, with only science, with only climate change. To get past those, we say you need to focus on another goal with the same steps to get there. On the OG, there is a goal to religion, to self-discovery. OO's claim thus far was just people don't believe in karma. So for some reason, people who don't believe in it are just going to opt out of the entire movement. Why do we not lose out on liberal supporters? I think unlike a lot of other debates about incorporating things like religious rhetoric in liberal movements, there isn't really much of a trade-off you have to make if you're saying things like environmentally friendly religion. If anything, the teachings of environmental movements have always been in line with the teachings of religion, like the concept of the Garden of Eden and the importance of protecting it, or the Buddhist precept to refrain from destroying living creatures as a whole. So we don't think you need to compromise your liberal values or whatever. It doesn't matter whether or not you're religious, insofar as it aligns with your values that the earth is important. But whether you're religious or not, I just think it's highly unlikely for the atheists to also opt out of the environmental movement as a whole. Like regardless of whether it's religious or not, the earth is still dying. People still believe in science. We told you it's a tool in a toolbox in our entire movement. So it's unclear as to why there's going to be a trade-off that we have to accept. The key nuance that we gave to you, however, is because of the previous narrative that conservative and liberal views are diametrically opposed. Very few people have ever bothered to view the climate fight in a religious light. And many few people have made the link to the idea that maybe, just maybe, the idea of climate change and fighting it is also something that can pertain to my religious values as well. So in a sense of whether it's likely going to persuade people, we told you why it's far more likely for people who previously opted out of the climate movement for the sake of more traditional values like their religion, to now look at this particular link, find a moment of realization, find an ability for them to be able to link this current cause with the idea of wanting to build a better afterlife for themselves, and that is what leads them to the tipping point for action on our side. Now that we've proven likelihood, let's prove efficacy. What are our unique paths to action, where Kayson gave you 3 individually standing ones? Firstly, we resolved the fundamental link for personal stake, where we told you previously, many people are too selfish in order for them to care about future generations. Now the people who are selfish now know that in an afterlife, in my future reincarnation, I'm also going to be affected as well. Or when I go to hell, or like if you go to heaven or hell or whatever, the way that I my current climate is also going to affect my afterlife in the future. So my future existence is going to be affected as a result of this karma. That's why I have to actively help the climate. Secondly, is individual action. The unresolved problem on the opposition is that it's currently impossible to get over the framing that climate change is a gargantuan task to solve. So people often become apathetic to the idea of acting because they believe that individual action is not going to pose any impact at all. This is going to be true regardless of any alternative they give to you on the opposition. What we told you was, if you don't believe it's enough to combat climate change, believe that it's enough to affect your karmic path. Believe that it's enough for you to affect your religious self-discovery. Before I move on towards the final path, I'll take a point.
Yeah, this framing works for religions whose afterlife is predicated on good works. What about a vast majority of religions whose afterlife occur irregardless of the works they do while they are alive?
No, but the concept of the afterlife is still going to be affected by your particular actions regardless. There are many different types of afterlife you are also able to access. That's why things like religion often preach things like heaven or hell or different forms of reward or punishment. Linking it towards these systems is exactly our mechanism on the government. That's where most religions operates, like you are operating under the minority here. The third final path that we gave you was the idea of communal action. We told you that on the side where you're only framing this as a climate movement action, the scale of action are oftentimes too large for people to be turned on to turn towards action to begin with. They view this as a global fight. Too many people need to work together. It's very, very unclear how people are likely going to communicate or coordinate together. And that's what turns a lot of people away into disassociating from the hard path towards action. What we say is if your community has a communal karma, is effectively affected by your communal karma, then doing things like smaller groups of environmental action is also going to help you personally. What exactly is so important about us? I think that OP has plenty of alternatives for why people can care, but it cannot surpass many insurmountable issues insofar as you're talking about something as large scale and as hardline as that of climate change. You need to be able to search for a compromise. That's why OG takes the first in this round.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for the final speech and now inviting the Deputy Leader for Opposition to close the opening half. Here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Setting my timer. Panel, in the 1920s, in a spate of a lot of accidents because of the use of cars, the car industry invented the term jaywalking and successfully made it a crime in order to push the burden of road safety to pedestrians, but not the state and not the car makers. In the 1980s, the soft drink industry, particularly Pepsi and Coca-Cola, came up with campaigns to encourage people to recycle, to shy away from the fact that they produce all these plastics over recyclable materials as a cost-saving measure because glass and aluminum became a bit more expensive. Industry has historically and continuously tried very hard to push the harms that they cause, whether an environment, whether in other forms of the world, into individuals, even though they are the main and primary cause of the harms. We think it is not in the interest of environmental groups to use the narrative of karma, as it gives industry a free pass and help them along its ways and curtails the group's efforts to get changes to the behaviors of individuals, states, and corporations. I'm going to deal with OG in three things. They tell us, religious and karma is good. And they say they just had some response to Owen, right? A few things, right? The first is the point of Owen's material is to say that the narrative excludes people of Abrahamic faith who cannot engage with the narrative. For example, Islam prohibits disbelief as shirk, means that your narrative of karma is not able to affect and engage with half the world population. And if you can engage with them, you cannot affect their behaviors. They don't believe in it. How are you going to use that to convince them to change their behavior? Right? Secondly, it forgets that Owen specifically characterizes that there are people who are engaged with karma, and these are people who probably already do it in their daily lives in terms of how they react and so on and so forth. There's no delta here. Secondly, they tell us that there are people who are selfish and self-interested who need religion and karma. Yeah, but that's not the only thing that can affect them, right? Even if they're self-interested, you can frame it to say that they will also be affected themselves in the current life. You can tell them it will help you, but it's not really you, it's the corporations, right? Really is that OG really fails to prove is that are there stakeholders that the movement can only convince to care about the environment if they use the framework of karma? And I don't think they have successfully proved that there are people. And the last thing in OG is that they forget that the movement have finite resources and finite platforms. They cannot just claim and put a narrative of everything they want in the world. Owen talks about why karma is a poor way of making individuals change behavior. We'll extend on it and why it allows corporations and states to avoid their responsibility to the environment. The next question I will answer is why a narrative of karma shifts the burden from corporations and states to individual. The reason here is that karma is individualistic. You reap what you sow, meaning the movement will in essence be preaching about individual responsibility in respect of the environment. It will be telling people to change their own behaviors to follow a list of some best practices. Or you need to recycle lah, you need to sort out your garbage lah, you need to not litter, you need to don't use plastic, consume less, reduce, reuse, recycle, blah, 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 blah. The reason why this is individualistic and only works on the individuals is that corporations don't have an afterlife, right? They don't reincarnate as a cockroach after it becomes bankrupt and they wind it up, right? The thing to note is that the concept of corporate personality and separate personality also offers conceptual respite and a suspension of belief to directors and controllers of the company, right? They can say, it's the company that do, it's not me personally, so it's okay. Even if I believe in karma, like, okay, it's not my karma, it's the company's karma, and like, they don't really care about karma, right? The next thing to note is that even if people subscribe, which Owen tells you that a lot of people won't, right? It means that people also necessarily subscribe to the idea, sit down, that I only have to care about what I do, right? As long as I'm doing fine, I'm okay, my afterlife is okay, right? What other people do, they will suffer their own consequences later. This also relates to corporate actions, right? If Coca-Cola makes too many plastic bottles, Coca-Cola will suffer its consequences, not me. So I shouldn't care about what Coca-Cola is doing. Number one, this means that people are less likely to care about and are less likely to seek to change how corporations operate and how other people and what corporations do, and also like other individuals, right? Second to note here is that it also causes people to become less likely to vote for politicians that will legislate for more regulations and policies that will curtail these corporate harms, right? Because they will suffer their own consequences. I shouldn't care about that. Sit down. Right? The second question I answer is that why do corporations have the incentive to shift the burden and why states have the incentive to play along? Number one, shifting burdens means you're able to say, hi, I'm not the only cause, I'm only responding to the demands of the people. This ignores the fact that demand is manufactured and artificial. It's a product of pricing and availability which industries control. Secondly, shifting burdens means you're also able to say there's no point in regulation, so you don't need to vote for regulation because you can then say, the people will do it regardless. You don't need to vote. I'll take a point from closing.
Green capitalism that sells people falsely environmentally friendly products are still propped up by consumers who embrace ignorant bliss. Why are they suddenly absolved of all blame?
Yeah, you make that worse when you preach on individual responsibility, right? Lastly, why we think the environmental movement is the only viable source of voice that will point the burden to state and corporations, and why we cannot lose this as a counter narrative. The first thing to note here is that corporations and states control the media, right? And narratives that come out from the media. So given that they have the incentive to shift the burden to individuals and have done so in the past, it follows that they have incentive to continue doing that using their control of the media. Second thing to note is that the environmental movement is the only source of voice that has a sufficient platform that can point a finger at corporations and harms that are caused by corporations. And it is the only source of a counter narrative that we have in society today. Think about it. Who else has such big of a voice that can say, we need to listen to this in terms of the environment? What's going on is as a result of the corporations and stuff like that. Which with this counter narrative, there's an oversaturation of narrative of individual responsibility. So and the next thing to note is that environmental movements don't have infinite resources and airtime. While we contend that environmental movements are at the forefront of environmental issue and enjoy platform in this regard, it is not infinite. There's a limited amount of platform, airtime, and resources. Preaching one narrative means a weakening of your ability to preach other alternatives, which means that the impact of preaching karmic narratives means that an individual responsibility means that the environmental movement is less able to preach corporate and state responsibility. Next thing then, is there change that is meaningful? We concede that we have not seen a lot of significant change for the better in terms of the environment. However, we need to accept that there are incremental changes and awareness of people to the scale of harms by corporations and the rich, and people are trying to do something about it. Meaning of tracking the flights of Taylor Swift and all that, and Coca-Cola and stuff like that, right? What changes that we currently see, whatever trend we see, it's only possible with a counter narrative. We need the environmental movement. The environmental movement needs to defend the counter narrative post.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for the very fine speech, and now inviting closing member to begin the closing half. Here.
Oh, hi, can I be given permission to turn on my video?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. All right, thanks. POIs verbally, please. Yeah, I'll start my speech in a second. Just pull out my timer. Okay. Starting my speech in 3. Oh yeah, I'm audible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, nice. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I hope to see an opening house that took the issue of the climate as a serious one and gave you genuine constructive advice that made karma the only viable alternative in status quo. Yet, up till now, I'm still unsure what exactly karma means to your average stakeholder and how exactly OG plans on administering it effectively. OO doesn't do much better, opting into playing the blame game as opposed to saving our planet. The case simply feels irrelevant and borderline distasteful. Well, everything they were supposed to do, CG will do. We take first for undertaking this burden alone. But before that, some crucial reframing as to why we need drastic action to save the environment that uniquely the karma model could achieve. Firstly, the status quo of the climate crisis. We have arguably crossed a point of no return. The Paris argument has been dishonored. First world nations have for the most part failed to meet their climate agendas, and warming by 1.5 degrees looks inevitable by 2030. We need drastic action, so drastic that it requires everyday people going out of their way to go green. For example, the Just Stop All movement capitalizes on this. Yet such urgency has bred panic and therefore a disagreeable climate movement. For example, Just Stop All seems downright unreasonable. They are, but in a situation as dire as this, what else do we expect? But more importantly, this is why CG proposes our unique karma model. Opening would have you believe it appeals to reason and is principally consistent with the movement, yet they conspicuously fail to examine the comparative of how exactly it changes who supports the movement, and more importantly, how the support for the movement in of itself changes. This was a movement about the type of, this was a debate about the type of support we achieve. We told you the most drastic version of it, the one that gave our race a chance at prosperous survival that only existed on CG. Notice the crucial reframing here. The debate thus far has identified support as a one-dimensional directly measurable metric. We changed that. This is the single most important piece of analysis in the debate today. CG comes into this debate recognizing a characteristic of concern. While both opening houses contend on a very general level of what really garners social support for the environmental movement, admittedly, they do it quite well too. However, they leave out 2 crucial pieces of analysis that is central to this debate. One, why is the karma mechanism even likely to gain traction in the first place, unlike most other attempts to appeal to individuals that have failed in the past? OG said it appeals to individual interests as a whole. We think that simply wasn't persuasive enough, considering the argument on religion from OO, making it differ from person to person, paired with the scale of importance that this premise has. Secondly, how do we ensure it doesn't feed into the social problem of superficial green consumerism, where individuals solve the climate crisis through buying Starbucks? I find it hard to distinguish the notion of karma from superficial consumerism today that tells people they're good because they buy overpriced organic food in status quo. They run the risk of the movement being a corporate ploy to make money, which does far more harm than good. I think Wesley actually does a pretty good job in pointing this out. By the end of these extensions, we answer these 2 central questions for the Gulf case, for it to even make sense and bring forth the most important analysis in the debate onto the extension as to how the specific kind of support we achieve by appealing to people's conscience is far better than anything else. First layer, what does the average environmentally conscious consumer look like and how do we change them for the better? Chair, we must contend with the dystopian world in which we live, where the notion of being benevolent or environmentally conscious are so central to social status that it's become a metric of false virtue signaling and frankly, narcissism. I buy organic food, for example, because it makes me good by society standards. Therefore, I feel good about myself. Yet, the corporate reality of these superficial notions is a consumerist behavior that is exploited by corporations. For example, iPhones that use environmentally friendly packaging as an excuse not to sell you the charging brick and to source their metals unsustainably using things like child labor that deprive the earth of seriously important resources. If consumers cared so much, why do they continue to support these hypocritical corporations? The answer was simple: because they didn't care about the environment, they cared about feeling like they cared about the environment. This is a movement riddled by the exploits of capitalism that destroys the environment with its ironic virtue of saving it. Diallo was very clever in pointing this out through corporate exploitation, yet consumers continue continue to support them. You retain a good part of the blame for this. Also, I thought this was a debate about saving the trees, not pointing the finger. I frankly don't care who takes action. If I can wake up 50 years and see greenery outside my window, I think we've won. How does the prop model change this, and why is it so likely to be influential then? Firstly, on the karma mechanism, OG simply doesn't tell you enough. They tell you it appeals to people's reason and their individual interests, and therefore it works. Not enough. We will actively propose the idea that individuals can secure their future by being genuinely good to the environment. Wesley brilliantly calls this out. CG literally has to reinvent the gov bench mechanism. This was a critical error on the OG's part. First, this looks like going out of their way to be inquisitive of the authenticity of the products they buy. For example, the superficial nature of corporations has been called out many times before. There are websites the same way that they are for those corporations that fund Israel that falsely flag out companies that tout the flag of environmental benevolence. Essentially, it is easy to be a responsible environmentalist if you actually want to. How do we achieve that? We argue it materializes in telling individuals that the cumulative value and scale of their actions both influence their karmic status. So it's not just about doing something, it's about doing lots of things and doing lots of big things. And I think that incentivizes individuals because it's what I can do in terms of my own agency and what I can do in terms of my own power. It doesn't lock people out because they can't buy expensive organic food. But most importantly, why is this likely incredibly influential in terms of the social opt-in? We have proven both appealing to consumers rationally and through shock factor stunt fails, either because they've got too much going on in their life to care, or like that groups like Just Stop All seem unreasonable. These things don't work. However, we hijack the same incentive-driven narcissism that fuels superficial consumerism. Yet this time we do it in a way that punishes consumers who choose to embrace blissful ignorance. It is in your interest to care for the environment because it benefits you specifically, a richer family in the future, a better job tomorrow, whatever. Whatever karma means to you, I think it matters. I'm going to explain why it matters to everyone. Before that, I'll take you on that point.
Yeah, it's over 6, but why is it necessarily same POI? Why does this have to be packaged in a karma narrative? Why can't we just tell people this absence of utilizing karma?
Because it doesn't work at all, right? The notion here is that we need people to take drastic action, and the only way to do that in this selfish world of consumerism is to make this become something in their interest directly. Why does this work? Firstly, in terms of popular culture, you have social media as a way to find solace in being wrong and to justify hard decisions we've had to make. Karma is frequently thrown around as a mechanism and word on your Instagram reels and your TikToks. But secondly, when it comes to religious beliefs, it is central to various religions as a practical incentive to be a good person. Whether that be Hinduism or Islam, this takes down OO's really weird main argument that it religiously offends someone, because if that offends you, I'm pretty sure anything else you try is going to offend you for some weird reason. But on top of that, in terms of basic moral values, you reap what you sow. This isn't some weird religious concept. I think most people do good things expecting good things in return. It wasn't that hard. But we win this debate because of how we impact this. Firstly, the movement now becomes self-sustaining. Individuals don't have to constantly be incentivized with individual environmental campaigns calling out certain companies or practices because we hijack their individual behavior. This regains crucial political capital for the movement. Now that the global environmental movement no longer has to spend its finite time convincing people to hop on the bandwagon, it is very quickly able to redirect its attention to legitimate action from programs that raise money to pursue environmental lawsuits or reforest certain areas. This layer contends directly with OO. We take your greatest criticism on the gov bench, something OG fails to answer, and tell you we welcome it. For individual virtues, different from person to person, automatically resonating with individuals because of how they appeal to the movement, never prouder to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for the fine speech, and now inviting member from CU. Here.
All right, am I audible and visible?
Yeah.
Okay, let me see. All right. Starting in 3. Oh yeah, I'll take verbal POIs, preferably from opening. If none from opening, I'll take from closing. 5th minute onwards. All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. A tool in a toolbox is only great if the tool does not erode every other tool and at the end of the day make you look like a tool. Here's how I'm going to step into this debate. I'm going to do a bit of couching. Let's explain why the opening half exchange wasn't that great, why CG at the end of the day doesn't really do much to extend this debate. Let's start with OG and handle OG first. So OG argues to you 2 things. OG tells you that, oh, the most important part of this debate is the conservatives and the non-believers. And then secondly, they say that these are also individuals who are selfish. Let's begin with number 1. Let's talk about this conservative conversion argumentation. See, the problem with this concept is that it requires a prerequisite belief that is already aligned with the religion they wish to persuade. I.e., the problem here then is, are you able to convince like Christians and Muslims to stop celebrating consumerism consumerist holidays like Hari Raya and Christmas. Insofar as people already don't believe in those things, I think it's far less persuasive to those conservatives, and more likely than not, you're unable to align them to what you already believe for the environmental movement. But secondly, on the idea of selfish narratives, that the reality is that there are already employable strategies that work in targeting the more selfish of individuals. That's why Wesley's POI twice is extremely important, because Garth's burden here is to prove the unique benefit of karma. And if government, and I think CG is going to elevate the burden, I don't think CEO is going to do this burden, I think O doesn't really solve this, is going to prove to you that absent of karma, there are already mechanisms that exist to handle this. I think it's very clear that Garth loses this debate, because there are simple narratives like if you do not change your lifestyles, then you will face the consequences of higher prices of food. They are backed by science and data that's far more persuasive and more able to be changing, right? Set up a framing here. Let's talk about the process of preaching karma and what really preaching karma looks like. Because karma in this concept, or the principle behind the argumentation, or I forgot to do CG, but later, it's the same thing as OJ anyway. But the concept of karma at the end of the day is an emotional rhetoric that looks into trying to tug at people's heartstrings or make people change their behaviors by virtue of an arbitrary mechanism, usually using the concept of emotions, usually using the concepts of fear. The problem here is that if you're able to prove to you symmetrically that you're able to use science and data to achieve those things, and why it doesn't detract away from airtime, I think CG clearly wins this debate. Because look at the reality of how emotional rhetoric has already been used successfully in previous instances, i.e. the orangutan ad that everyone has seen, the usage of dissatisfaction from young individuals like Greta Thunberg. This strategy employs tugging at the heartstrings of individuals using scientific data is far more persuasive. But secondly, that it's true what O says, that people who believe in karma are already people who will be more likely than not to prescribe to the conservation of Earth anyway, because there are impacts and there will always be, the causal effect is very apparent. But lastly then, and here's where I move into substantive, because the reality of karma is that this strategy is extremely convoluted. The incentive of the environmental movement is to find the clearest and fastest pathway to success in achieving critical mass. Why talk about karma when you can say if you don't do certain things, you'll die at the end of the day? If you don't do certain things, the rising sea levels will affect the way in which you live. This makes the environmental movement at the end of the day look extremely wacky, where previously based on statistics, science, and rational explanations, now conversations will also include around if you pollute the earth, then you resurrect as a turtle where your daily diet are straws. This also distracts valuable resources and validity of what you want to talk about. Yeah, we agree. There is a time sensitivity that happens. That's why a large chunk of the time that could be thought about how to make the environmental movement more persuasive would look into karma and preaching this karma. It's a waste of time. This strategy is likely to flop and actually gives more ammunition to climate change deniers. CG and engaging with CG. See, CG suffers the same problem as OG, because CG says that you need to drastically change people's lifestyles and that you need to make sure, and they say, oh, you need to be more inquisitive of products they buy. This premise is contingent on opt-in. They need to alleviate the burden to why people will opt in the first place. That means that at best, both gov benches have not extremely proven the way in which opt-in happens. But secondly, defensive version of OG's case was this buy-in, we need to look at the product that we buy. But why is karma the only driver factor here? Because realistically, the idea surrounding changing your lifestyle can happen through scientific data, can happen through the reality that you're probably consuming more microplastics because you use plastic bags or whatever, like environmental stuff. But second here,
Point.
Sure, go. OG, go.
We told you already, if you are persuaded by science, you have been persuaded already. How do you tell the millions of old Buddhist aunties that refuse to take their sons to the doctor that they need to care about the climate?
Here's where I lead into that, okay? The extension here, and I'm going to extend from O here, because I think O was right. The extension that delineates from O is that you need to prove that people will believe. So your Buddhist aunties are like a minority. If it's true Abrahamic religions are the majority, you still lose out here. But the extension here is even further than that. It's not only that conservatives will not buy into the concept of karma, but the tying of the environmental movement and religious beliefs is the way in which malicious actors would use this to define the environmental movement as propagating Buddhist beliefs. And thus you should actively avoid this. So your Muslim leaders would say, do not participate in the environmental movement because they're trying to propagate Buddhist beliefs that are directly opposed to what we believe in. So, like, dude, Muslims believe that yoga should be avoided because it's a Hindu agenda, right? But then let's then talk about moderates, and here's where we go even further. They talk about
Six.
moderates and maybe non-religious individuals. I'll take it later. The wackiness of the movement now is far more apparent because it's seen as a hippie movement that isn't grounded or based on reality. It's on arbitrary things like the big man in the sky and resurrection. The problem then is that how you paint the picture, the environmental movement isn't one that's realistic. Sure, go.
If I live in the developing world where the actual harms of climate change, or developed world where the actual harms of climate change are less proximate, or there's a flood barrier to prevent natural disasters, how am I supposed to take those claims seriously?
If you live in a developed world where you aren't affected by those things, you probably aren't going to be caring about karma anyway. So why is it essentially true? You can't prove exclusivity here. But lastly, then the comparative. I think the simple rundown of the case is one thing, is that the idea around time sensitivity and resource allocation is that it's zero sum at best. So what opposition needs to do, or what the environmental movement needs to do, is to eliminate all forms of unnecessary measures that complicates conversations about the environment. If you dissuade individuals from believing in the environmental movement by how it's painted as a religious narrative, you're losing a large chunk of individuals. Not only do you lose those conservatives, you lose people who generally are more rational and want to believe in something that's grounded based on reality. If emotional rhetoric is your solution, I think closing opposition has clearly proven how emotional rhetorics still exist and can exist absent of karma, multiple different ways you can do this. Don't anger the conservatives and don't make yourself look like hippies. Thank you.
All right. I'd like to thank the speaker for the final speech, and now inviting Governor. Here.
Just confirm, am I visible and audible?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you very much. I'll take verbal POI. Right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Speaking of religion, ironically, I haven't prayed Maghrib yet. But hey, okay. To some, God may not be the greatest, and I beg to disagree. But it's definitely better than the usage of and the exploitation of consumerist ideologies that are used by capitalists used by companies to make sure that they opt into the idea of the environmentalist movement. Because we believe that, ladies and gentlemen, the environmentalist movement requires a grounding. It is important for us to be able to ground the movement because it is severely fractured within the status quo. Because this isn't just gaining support, as we all concede from opposition, but it is about the type of support that you are able to garner in the status quo, ladies and gentlemen. Because we believe, ladies and gentlemen, that the way in which people support the environmentalist movement is highly likely due to the fact that they want to feel like a good person while not actually doing so. Because likely they are doing it as things like a facade for certain things, or they are likely to do it because of their own malevolent self-interest that is likely to then be very, very harmful. We take the angle by which we want to make sure that people aren't exploited by these sort of ideologies and are actually able to support the movement where it does matter and are able to strike when the iron is hot, where individuals are likely to be very, very much in search of a personal and a more I don't know what we call it. We call it rohani, a more spiritual kind of sense within themselves, ladies and gentlemen. We take that approach and we get to solve this problem. The problem with closing opposition was that they said that karma doesn't really matter within the realm of these areas of developed areas. But we feel as though, like, at the point at which they are privileged enough and they are exposed to all of these online discourse about what it means to support the environmentalist movement or how to support the environmentalist movement, likely they want to find ways in which they want to spiritually discover themselves and are likely to spread things within their social media, like, I don't know, be good and God will love you, whatever, within and are privileged enough to be able to believe that. So likely karma does matter. And we believe that we are going to take a bit on what opening opposition said, which is that a lot of the times the idea of what karma is in relation towards the environmentalist movement is already captured within other religions as well. It's literally just the basic idea is you do good, you get good, and the results here are good. And the problem is that a lot of these times, a lot of individuals who are within the realms of searching within their spiritual self aren't necessarily swayed by things such as science, because we believe that like a lot of the times, like it's just not it just doesn't really hit them emotionally as well. And we feel as though then the idea that when you do something and there's a consequentialist effect towards it, it essentially then does have an effect towards them. It does have an effect towards towards these individuals in order for them to enact change within the end. And we believe as though this form of emotional connection towards them is something that's important and is something that's unique, because there is a form of change that can essentially occur, because it's a specific form of support that is a specific form of support, and it's something that's way better in comparison to other alternatives that's way more harmful. Okay, the next thing then, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that then the next idea of how karma is essentially good is because it then allows people to feel as though that they have a feeling of accountability when you strike them within their emotions or within their spiritual self. Because it's really important for us to recognize historically as well that karma has been used within the first world to justify things like reparations and to allow and to give forms of diplomatic ties with colonial nations, ladies and gentlemen, because there is an emotional connection towards it, that if you don't do good when you are able to, and you are privileged enough and you are able to do it, it's something that should justify you doing it. And when you don't, there are consequences that are going to go against you towards it. So the fact that it has already been used historically as well, and it has worked, we believe that this is also the way in which we are able to ensure that within the first world, these forms of changes can essentially occur. Before that, yeah, go ahead.
How is telling people if you use plastic straw you will turn into a turtle in the next life different from telling people you have a responsibility to use a biodegradable straw? If not, next year a turtle will have a straw to its nose in your current life. What's the difference?
Yeah, okay, wait. I don't know why one comparative is always exclusive to the other. What? How about I mean, there
Can everyone hear Omar?
so sorry.
Oh yeah, so I got you caught off at when you were saying why is comparative, or why comparative can be exclusive or cannot be exclusive. So yeah, I'll just start from there.
All right. All right, so the idea here is that, ladies and gentlemen, historically it has worked because we strike them within their personal idea that tells them that you must follow in because they are religious, because there is a consequentialist act towards it. And if they were to be, and the point at which they were to appeal, sorry, not appeal, and they are going to abide by them are things in which they are going to be able to achieve then the best consequences that they are actually able to on a more personal level, because we attract them based on their personal interest. And all right, the POI that they answer, that they asked, we believe as though, okay, we don't believe that it's exclusive within both of those forms of ideologies, but we believe as though having this form of tool is actually able to align with the personal interests of these individuals, because it's likely to then be a way with which religious individuals can opt in, because their personal interest is that within the religion, we believe that it is something that is consequent. We believe that there are these consequentialist outcomes that can essentially occur, and this is how we are able to actually achieve it best, only through the name of using it with karma, right? So, with all those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that, especially as an extension towards Varun's speech, the way in which we weigh this in is that we're actually able to achieve the specific support that can actually strike the point where it actually matters, and we're actually able to make sure that people with the personal interest that is contained within themselves are able to we are able to utilize the ability for people to feel as though this is something important towards them as a way in which which they're able to opt into this movement as well, to be able to make sure that we get the best outcome overall. We cater towards these personal interests as well, in comparison towards corporations that are utilizing it and exploiting the consumer's benefits. God does a better job, and I believe that's how comparatives kind of work. Proud to propose. Yeah.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for the final speech and now inviting Owen to conclude the whole debate. Here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just scared there's background noise or something. Okay. I'll take a PI in the chat. Try not to interrupt me. Probably take it from opening, but closing you can go ahead instead in case Gelson doesn't want to ask PIs. The burden in this debate was simply surrounding buy-in. All CO has to do to prove to you that we win is prove that existing methods of conversation is sufficient for the environmental movement to further its goals in a timely manner. The position is simply that the existence of emotion via karma in these conversations around certain groups of people is vastly unnecessary at best. Furthermore, we proved to you that it's likely to detract from meaningful conversations surrounding environmental movements in terms of scientific conversation, in terms of individual conversations that can better breach these kinds of things, right? The environmental movement is urgent and the environmental is urgent, but all of government's policies are one step forward and 3 steps back. I want to give you one more piece of framing before I move into house-by-house responses. And I think it's this fallacy that comes from both gov houses, which gov assumes that spiritual people or people who subscribe to spiritual narratives will only relate to counter-spiritual narratives and they cannot relate to rationality and science. Given the fact that this is untrue, a vast majority of Christians and Muslims and Buddhists can subscribe to similar narratives that the environmental movement has already been progressing to begin with. What the key tipping point here is when you introduce karma as a narrative tied to an environmental movement, is when you get the distancing of these religious movements from karma, because you get Westboro Baptist Church saying that the environmental movement adopting the word karma or the language in which talks about karma means that they are a weapon for the Buddhist state in order to convert our brothers and sisters in Christ, right? It deals with the emotional connection of these things, which is irrespective of whether the environmental movement is actually co-opting spirituality in terms of karma. The very language that they talk about means a lot of Muslim imams are going to say that you're not able to, you cannot follow along the environmental movement because they are inherently against Islam. You're not able to follow the environmental movement because they go against your Christian values. We think this is the tipping point in which it actually grounds the point in which you have individuals further detract away from your movement. Let's start with CG first. So in a meta form, let's talk about 2 things. So number 1, CG says they reframe the debate but suffer from the very similar sins to opening government, right? If these individuals are characterized as selfish, I am unclear as to why they opt into these movements, given that their primary goals is being selfish. Furthermore, I am unclear as to why karma supersedes their ability to be selfish, why this narrative is so strong that it breaches their innate ability to always be selfish, despite what an environmental movement tells them. It is unclear as to who this actually speaks to and what extent of change these selfish individuals are likely to shift their mindsets and shift their behaviors is going to implement. But number 2, I'm actually just unclear who CG wants to talk about. At least OG and Gelson tells me that he wants to talk about religious individuals. After 2 speeches of CG, I am unclear as to what subsect of individuals they're actually catering from. But let's talk about the one response to their one main claim, right? Which is they're aiming to utilize the same language as green consumerism in order to make sure that individuals use karma to accept consumerism and do better things. For this to work, karma consumerism is what I'm going to call it, needs to fight existing narratives of green consumerism, and it needs to beat them in order to make sure that individuals are more able to subscribe to your new narrative. Given the fact that it's proven that the power of companies are so large, they're able to peddle out media forms in order to push their own narratives, they needed to prove why their new narrative of consuming green via a karmic response to seeing what's exactly in your products is something that overwhelmingly beats existing narratives of green consumerism. But let's just weigh here. Even on scale, if we get less effective methods of consumerism, we think the pace is enough because it crucially doesn't come at the expense of your most loyal base at a point which detracts from scientific conversations that are important to key parts of your consumer base, key parts of your movement, and key individuals who are instrumental to finding your scientific paths out of these environmental struggles. You detract from your movements because of the backlash you get in terms of political structures, in terms of political ammunition, religious backlash, and the ability to erode from social and political capital as a whole. I'll explain this more, but essentially everything else CG says is largely very similar to what OG says. I'll flag it up. Let's talk about OG. I want to make it clear, this debate isn't about Buddhist aunties like Gelson appears to make it seem like, because he agrees to the framing that if individuals believed in karma, they'd probably be environmentally sensitive anyways. Let's look at the three call-outs I want to make at the top of this, top of dealing with OG. Number one, their entire case is predicated on their buy-in towards karma. Given the fact that people already buying into karma isn't a part of this debate, they had to prove why karma was a narrative that made people who didn't exclusively buy either karma or the environmental movement would now buy into both. Even if they haven't proven that, they are unable to claim the vast majority of the benefits. Secondly, I'm also unclear why karma is the narrative. This karma narrative is the tipping point which pushes individuals to do more. Insofar as a vast majority of individuals are selfish like they claim, I'm unclear why this narrative shifts dynamically shifts their perception of life and the actions that they're going to implement. But number three, and this is my POI which went unresponded to, that a vast majority of their afterlife tying mechanisms only affects religions where afterlife is tied to good works, i.e. Buddhism and Hinduism, which already believe in karma, which aren't part of the debate. And this is a prerequisite for buy-in. That means you lose Judaism, you lose Islam, you lose Christianity, and you lose a vast proportion of these people who are already Abrahamic religions. So even in their best case, they have limited efficacy at best. But it doesn't stand up and it doesn't weigh, especially when it met to the multiple things that we told you were problems when you use this narrative. Political ammunition that tells you that you are a bunch of hippies, religious backlights from alternative Abrahamic religion, but also the erosion of capital because people don't see you as a very serious group that you're being talked about now. They see you as a bunch of jokers who want to talk about karmic beliefs in terms of saving an actual tangible. In terms of responses, I'll take Gelson in a bit. But in terms of responses, I think they give you two things. Number one, on urgency, this only works if you prove buy-in. It's not all the same because it's diametrically opposed and there are structural barriers that prevent people from buy-in. They're unlikely able to access the people that they think urgency is important for. But for efficacy, they need to prove why karma was the only way to do this, and they need to prove why people who didn't listen previously will now listen. I'll take Gelson, hurry.
So your idea is that people who are religious can still buy into science, but then because they hear the word Buddhism, suddenly they don't believe in science. Where's the realism in your case?
Yeah, it's because of weaponizing religious narratives. The fact that Islam can weaponize religious narratives on the streets and push people towards extreme actions. The fact that Westboro Baptist Church is one of the most hated things, which means religious narratives are incredibly powerful when they're used hatefully. You have to prove why benevolent religious narratives were something that superseded existing selfish mechanisms that exist within people. Insofar as you haven't done that, I think it's more persuasive to believe that religious people are more opting into hate. Why is the weighing and reweigh over OG? So even if there is some trade-off in targeting specific groups, I'm unclear as to why these groups are a tipping point or the only path is through karmic. Comparatively, you limit discourse and you disrupt the movement and the message. This is unstrategic and doesn't weigh against our harms. Finally, why do we weigh against opening opposition? Two reasons. Number one, we respond to the exclusivity argument coming from the side of government, which says that you can't do both because of limited airline. This completes their business argumentation because not only do they not talk about why corporations are hijacking this, but they actively take away capital from the people who want to talk about these issues, so these issues don't get platformed, they don't get talked about. We're also better able to prove why the scale of harm is far worse, not just a passive, non-effective, because we prove religious backlash, we prove scientific community removing themselves from this movement, and we prove the reduction in political and social capital to actually generate tangible change. I think closing opposition wins.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for the final speech, and also I'd like to thank everyone for the wonderful debate. You can now cross floor or virtually shake hands as well. I believe this is silent rounds, so no OAs and feedback until breaks are announced or tabs are released. Yeah, so have a good rest. I believe break announcement will be done within the next 45 minutes or so. Good luck and thank you for the debate again.
Thank you for the debate, everyone.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
For the debate.